You know that feeling when your phone buzzes and you see your mother-in-law's name pop up on the screen, and suddenly your entire nervous system goes into fight or flight mode. Your stomach drops, your shoulders tense, and you're already bracing for whatever's about to unfold. Maybe it's a text asking why you haven't visited in 2 weeks, even though you saw her last Sunday. Maybe it's a helpful suggestion about how you're raising your kids, cooking dinner, or organizing your home. Or maybe it's just a passive-aggressive comment wrapped in a smiley face emoji that somehow makes you feel like you're failing at being a decent human being. And here's the wild part. You're not crazy for feeling this way. Your brain is picking up on something real, something deeply embedded in human psychology that's been playing out in family dynamics for thousands of years. Let me tell you what's actually happening here, because once you understand the psychological machinery behind toxic in-law relationships, you'll realize this isn't about you being too sensitive or them being uniquely evil. It's about how our brains are wired for survival in small tribal groups, and how those same mechanisms can turn modern family structures into emotional battlegrounds. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective for a second. For most of human history, when your child got married, you weren't just gaining a new family member. You were potentially losing a critical resource. Your daughter or son represented years of investment, protection, food sharing, childcare support. They were part of your survival network, and suddenly this stranger comes along and takes them away, redirecting all that loyalty, energy, and resources toward a different family unit. From your primitive brain's point of view, this is a threat, not a conscious, malicious threat, but a deep ancestral anxiety about losing your place in the tribe, losing influence, losing control over the future. This is why so many toxic in-law dynamics revolve around control. It's not that your mother-in-law wakes up thinking, how can I ruin their day today? It's that her brain is running an ancient program that says, I need to maintain my position in this family structure. I need to ensure my genetic legacy is protected. I need to keep my child close. And when you show up as the partner, you're not just a person. You're a competitor for resources, attention, and influence. You're the outsider who threatens the established order. Now here's where it gets really interesting. There's a psychological concept called kin selection, which basically means we're hardwired to favor our genetic relatives over non-relatives. It's why parents will sacrifice almost anything for their children, why siblings have complicated but enduring bonds, and why your in-laws might unconsciously view you as less important than their own offspring. You can be the kindest, most generous, most accomplished person in the world, and to some part of their primitive brain, you'll still be the outsider who took their child away. It's not personal, but it sure feels personal when you're on the receiving end of snide comments about your cooking or parenting choices, and your partner, caught in the middle, is dealing with their own psychological conflict. They love you, they've chosen you, they want to build a life with you, but they also have decades of conditioning telling them that their parents' approval matters, that family loyalty is paramount, that questioning or confronting their parents means being a bad son or daughter. This creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, where two conflicting beliefs exist simultaneously. They know their parent is being unfair to you, but they also can't fully reconcile the idea that their mom or dad might be the problem. So what do? Often they minimize, they make excuses. They say things like, that's just how she is, or he doesn't mean it that way, because it's psychologically easier than facing the reality that their parent is choosing to behave in hurtful ways. Let's talk about boundaries for a second, because this is where most toxic in-law situations either improve or completely implode. Boundaries are essentially the psychological property lines that define where you end and another person begins. They're the rules about what behavior you'll accept and what you won't. And here's the thing about boundaries that nobody tells you. They feel mean when you first start setting them, especially if you've spent your whole life being accommodating and people-pleasing. When you tell your father-in-law that unannounced visits don't work for your family, or when you tell your mother-in-law that parenting advice needs to be requested before it's given, you might feel like you're being harsh or disrespectful, but you're not. You're actually doing something incredibly healthy and necessary. Toxic in-laws often push back hard against boundaries because boundaries disrupt their sense of control. Remember, their brain is trying to maintain influence and position within the family structure. When you set a boundary, you're essentially saying, you don't get to dictate the terms of this relationship anymore. We're equals and I have agency here. And for someone who's been operating from a place of assumed authority, that feels like a personal attack. They might guilt trip you, play the victim, or escalate their behavior to test whether you'll actually enforce the boundary. This is where you need to understand something crucial. Their reaction to your boundary is not evidence that the boundary was wrong. It's evidence that the boundary was necessary. There's also this fascinating psychological phenomenon called triangulation that shows up constantly in toxic family dynamics. This is where instead of two people communicating directly about an issue, a third person gets pulled in to mediate, take sides, or relay messages. So instead of your mother-in-law telling you directly that she's upset about something, she tells your partner, who then tells you, and suddenly what could have been a straightforward conversation becomes a complicated web of he said, she said drama. Triangulation serves a specific purpose. It allows the toxic person to avoid accountability while still exerting influence. If they never said it directly to you, they can always claim you misunderstood, you're being too sensitive, or you're putting words in their mouth. Breaking out of triangulation requires something really difficult, insisting on direct communication and refusing to be the messenger. When your partner comes to you and says, "Mom said she's hurt that you didn't call her on her birthday," the healthy response is, "If she's hurt, she can talk to me about it directly." This feels uncomfortable because we're taught that keeping the peace means accommodating everyone's communication preferences, but healthy relationships require honesty and directness, not elaborate games of telephone. Now, I want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough: the toll this takes on your mental health. Living with ongoing tension with in-laws isn't just annoying or frustrating, it's genuinely stressful in a physiological way. Your body releases cortisol, your immune system takes a hit, your sleep quality decreases, and over time, this chronic stress can contribute to anxiety, depression, and a host of physical health problems. And because it's family, you can't just cut contact the way you might with a toxic friend or coworker. You're stuck navigating holidays, birthdays, family events, all while trying to protect your peace and maintain your sanity. This is why self-compassion is so critical. You're not weak for finding this difficult. You're not failing because you haven't figured out how to make everyone happy. You're dealing with a genuinely challenging psychological situation that involves competing loyalties, power dynamics, boundary violations, and deep-seated evolutionary programming. Give yourself credit for showing up, for trying, for caring enough to even think about how to improve the situation. Here's something that might help reframe the whole experience. Toxic in-laws often reveal more about their own insecurities than they do about your worth. When someone constantly criticizes how you keep your house, it's usually because they've tied their self-worth to domestic perfection, and seeing you do things differently threatens their sense of identity. When they undermine your parenting, it's often because they feel insecure about their own parenting choices and need validation. When they compete for your partner's attention, it's because they're terrified of becoming irrelevant as their child builds a new life. None of this excuses the behavior, but it does take the personal sting out of it. It's not really about you, it's about them working through their own unresolved anxiety and fear. So what do you actually do with all this information? First, get clear with your partner about what you both want the relationship with the in-laws to look like, not what you think it should look like or what would make everyone else happy, but what actually works for your mental health and your marriage. Then, set boundaries that reflect those values and enforce them consistently. Expect pushback, expect guilt, expect accusations of being controlling or ungrateful. And stand firm anyway, because you're not responsible for managing their emotions. You're only responsible for protecting your own well-being and the health of your primary relationship. And if you're the partner whose parents are the difficult ones, please understand that your loyalty needs to be with the family you're creating, not the family you came from. That doesn't mean abandoning your parents or cutting them off. It means recognizing that your spouse is your partner, your teammate, your chosen family. When you minimize their hurt or make excuses for bad behavior, you're telling them that they matter less than keeping your parents comfortable. That's a recipe for resentment and disconnection. The truth is, some in-law relationships will never be warm and close, and that's okay. You don't need everyone to like you. You don't need to force connection where there's fundamental incompatibility. What you need is respect, basic courtesy, and clearly defined boundaries. And if you can't get that, you need the wisdom to limit your exposure and protect your peace. Remember, you're navigating one of the most psychologically complex relationship dynamics that exists. You're dealing with attachment, identity, power, control, and tribal belonging, all wrapped up in holiday dinners and birthday parties. Be patient with yourself, be clear about your boundaries, and know that creating a healthy relationship with difficult in-laws isn't about changing them. It's about changing how much power you give them over your emotional state. You're doing better than you think.